Okay, sometimes in a game, a player gets to see their opponent's strategy before deciding on a strategy of their own, and sometimes you don't get enough time to see what your opponent is going to do, so both are making their decisions simultaneously. And if the opponent is predictable or telegraphs their move, then we can assume that the players are playing an alternate move game, and a tree diagram is going to help us choose a strategy. In this example, we have a hockey player who's about to take a shot on goal, and the strategy the hockey player will use depends on the position of the goalie. So if the goalie is out from the goal, then he's probably going to have a better chance of scoring if he uses a decoy to get around the goalie. But if the goalie is deep in the goal, then shooting is probably more likely to be a better strategy than using a decoy. Although this model is simplified, I think the player sitting on the bench can still benefit from pulling out the general principles here and making some mental calculations before they get on the ice. So a player can make an assessment of basic probabilities and perhaps use a tree diagram, or perhaps mentally use a tree diagram to represent them, all possible outcomes. So our tree diagram looks like this. Either the goalie is out of the goal or in the goal, and then depending on what the player sees as they approach the goal, they decide to shoot or use a decoy. And of course the player sitting on the bench should try to assess the probability that they're going to score a goal in either of those situations. And of course there are 4 scenarios here, and for each scenario they should calculate the probability that they score or do not score. Okay, if the estimated probabilities are as on this tree diagram, and notice these are decisions that the players make, so there isn't a probability associated with these branches in the diagram. These are just labeling what decisions the players have made. So this player who's shooting knows what the goalie has done as they approach the goal. So if the probabilities are as they are, then the player wants to choose a strategy that's going to maximize their probability of scoring. And of course, which strategy they choose depends on what they see the goalie doing as they approach the goal. So if the goalie is out of the goal, then if the player chooses to use a decoy, they have a 70% chance of scoring. But if they decide to shoot, they have a 20% chance of scoring. So the best strategy depends on what the goalie is doing. If the goalie is out of the goal, then the player maximizes their probability of scoring by using a decoy. So the strategy must include an if this then that type statement. So if the goalie is out of the goal, then the player should use a fake or a decoy. On the other hand, if the goalie is in the goal, then shooting has a 90% chance of getting a score, whereas using a decoy just has a 50% chance of getting a score. So the second part of the strategy says what to do if the player is deep in the goal or deep in the crease. The player should shoot. Now, if we change the probabilities, the strategy will probably change, or may change. So suppose the probabilities look like this, then what's the best strategy for the player? Well, we see if the goalie is out of the goal, then shooting has a 60% chance of scoring, but using a decoy just has a 50% chance of scoring. So again, these probabilities would depend on the goalie, perhaps the league. It's quite conceivable that in little leagues, maybe the goalie may not respond to a decoy as quickly as you would expect, and so on. So in this case, the best strategy is the one that leads to the greatest probability of scoring, which is to shoot. So if the goalie is out of the goal, the player should shoot. And if the goalie is in the goal, then also shooting gives the greatest probability of scoring. So the strategy in this case can be summarized as no matter what the goalie is doing, the player should always shoot.